The mansion was quiet, the kind of silence that only money can buy. The chandeliers glowed dimly, casting golden light across the marble floors. In the grand bedroom, Ethan Cross, one of the most powerful CEOs in the city, lay still on his king-sized bed. But tonight, he wasn't really sleeping. His eyes were closed, his breathing soft and steady, but behind the calm exterior, his mind was wide awake. He was pretending to sleep. The reason? His new maid. Her name was Clara. She was shy, quiet, and almost invisible. She had only been working in the mansion for a month, but something about her felt different. Unlike the others, she never looked at him directly, never lingered for a conversation, and always kept her head down. But it wasn't just shyness, there was something deeper, something that made Ethan curious. He wanted to know who she really was, and what she did when she thought no one was watching. Tonight, he had the chance. It was past midnight, and the rain outside painted silver streaks on the tall windows. Clara was finishing her last task, cleaning his room. Ethan's schedule was always strict, he went to bed early and woke before dawn. She assumed he was asleep, as usual. But this time, he wasn't. Ethan lay perfectly still, one arm over his chest, listening as the door creaked open softly. The sound of gentle footsteps entered the room, light, careful, and respectful. Clara's presence was almost ghost-like as she moved about, tidying the nightstand and adjusting the curtains. Ethan could smell her faint lavender scent, clean and soft. He expected her to do her work and leave quietly as always. But then she stopped near his bedside. For a moment, there was only silence, then he heard the soft rustle of fabric as she knelt down beside the bed. Ethan's heart quickened. What was she doing? He could feel her presence closer now, so close he could sense her trembling. She hesitated for several seconds, then whispered so quietly it was almost lost in the rain, "You work too hard, sir." Ethan's mind froze. Her voice was filled with concern, not fear or duty, but something gentle, almost sad. She reached up and carefully adjusted the blanket over his shoulders, as if afraid to wake him. Then, to his surprise, she took out a small folded piece of paper from her apron pocket. She looked at it for a long time before placing it on his nightstand. "You probably won't read this," she whispered again, "but thank you, for helping me keep this job. It means more than you know." Ethan's pulse slowed. What did she mean by that? He had never spoken to her directly, never even noticed her much until recently. Yet her voice carried gratitude and quiet emotion. Clara stood there for a moment, gazing at his face. Then she did something that made him freeze completely. She brushed a stray lock of hair away from his forehead with trembling fingers. Her touch was light, so light it barely felt real. "You remind me of my brother," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "He used to work too much too, until it killed him." Her voice broke at the last word, and Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to open his eyes, to tell her to stop crying, to ask what had happened. But he couldn't move. Something about her sincerity held him still. She straightened up and took a deep breath, trying to hide her pain behind a small smile. Then she turned to leave. But as she reached the door, Ethan couldn't keep up the act anymore. "Clara," he said quietly, his voice low but firm. She froze instantly, her hand gripping the door handle. Slowly, she turned, eyes wide with fear and embarrassment. "Sir, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean," she stammered. Ethan sat up, his usual cold composure replaced by something softer. "You thought I was asleep," he said calmly. "Why did you say those things?" Clara's face turned pale. "I shouldn't have spoken at all, sir. Please forgive me. I was just," she looked down, twisting her hands nervously. "I was just thankful. You didn't fire me when I accidentally broke that vase last week. It was worth more than I could ever repay." Ethan remembered. He had almost forgotten about it, he hadn't fired her because, truthfully, she looked terrified that day. "You cried for a vase?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "No, sir. I cried because I couldn't afford to lose this job. My mother is sick, and my little sister's school fees." Her voice trailed off, shame covering her face. Ethan felt something inside him shift. All these years, he had built walls around his heart, walls made of steel and silence. People served him out of fear or ambition, never out of kindness. But this young woman, this quiet maid, had shown him something genuine without expecting anything in return. "Come here," he said softly. Clara hesitated, then slowly stepped closer. Ethan looked at her with a mixture of guilt and awe. "You thought I was asleep. Yet you still showed kindness." He paused. "Most people only act good when someone's watching." Clara's eyes glistened again. "I didn't do anything special, sir. She hesitated, then said, "I just didn't want you to catch a cold." Ethan smiled faintly for the first time in a long while. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was warm, filled with quiet understanding. He looked at her again and said, "You've been working here for a month. Why didn't you ever ask for help with your family?" She shook her head quickly. "Because it's not your problem, sir. I'm grateful just to have this job." Ethan leaned back, thoughtful. "Clara," he said slowly, "starting tomorrow, you won't be cleaning anymore. I'm transferring you to the office. You'll work as my assistant." Her mouth fell open. "Sir. I don't deserve that." He smiled gently. "You deserve more than most people I've met." Tears rolled down her cheeks, and she covered her mouth in disbelief. Ethan stood, walking toward the window. The rain had stopped, and the city lights shimmered in the distance. "You reminded me of something tonight," he said quietly. "That kindness still exists, even when no one's watching." Clara bowed deeply, unable to speak. Ethan turned back, his eyes softening. "Go get some rest. Tomorrow's a new start, for both of us." As she left the room, the faint scent of lavender lingered in the air. Ethan sat back on his bed, staring at the note she had left behind. In her simple handwriting, it read, "Thank you for giving me a reason to hope again." For the first time in years, Ethan smiled, not the cold, businesslike smile he showed the world, but a real one. And as the night deepened, he realized something profound. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can awaken even the coldest hearts. The city never truly slept, but inside Ethan Cross's mansion, silence ruled the night. The faint ticking of the golden clock on the wall was the only sound that filled the vast bedroom. Ethan lay still beneath silk sheets, his eyes closed, his breathing slow and even. But he wasn't asleep. Tonight, the billionaire CEO was pretending. He had a reason, a strange curiosity that had been growing over the past few weeks. Ever since the new maid arrived, the one who moved like a shadow and spoke barely above a whisper, something about her had unsettled him. Her name was Clara. She was different from anyone who had ever worked in his home. She never sought attention, never looked him in the eye, and never made mistakes. She worked quietly, diligently, and always disappeared before he could say a word. But what caught Ethan's attention most was how gentle she was with everything she touched, as if the world around her was fragile. He had seen hundreds of employees come and go, but no one like her. He wanted to know who she really was, what she did when she thought no one could see. So tonight, he lay there, pretending to sleep, to see the truth behind the silence. The door opened softly. The sound of delicate footsteps echoed across the marble floor. She entered slowly, holding a small lamp that cast a warm glow around the room. She thought he was asleep, as always. Ethan kept perfectly still. He could hear the rustle of her apron as she moved quietly, tidying the table, straightening the curtains, arranging the glass of water near his bed. Everything she did was careful, respectful, almost tender. Then she paused. Ethan could sense her near his bedside now, hesitating. He felt the air shift slightly, her soft breathing so close he could almost feel it on his skin. She knelt down beside his bed and whispered, so gently that he barely caught the words, "You work too hard, sir." The sincerity in her voice struck something deep inside him. No one had ever spoken to him like that before, not out of duty, not out of flattery, but with quiet care. Then she reached out, almost shyly, and pulled the blanket up to his shoulders, tucking it in with the same gentleness a mother would show a child. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. He wanted to open his eyes, to say something, but he stayed still, curious about what she would do next. Then he heard the sound of paper rustling. She took a small folded note from her apron pocket and placed it on his nightstand. "You'll probably never read this," she whispered again, "but thank you, for letting me stay, even after I broke that vase. You don't know how much this job means to me." Ethan remembered that day. The vase had been priceless, and when it shattered, he had seen the fear in her eyes. He hadn't fired her, not because he was kind, but because he hadn't cared enough to. But now, hearing her words, he realized it had meant the world to her. He wanted to ask her why. Then she did something that froze him completely. She brushed his hair gently away from his forehead. Her hand trembled as she did it, her touch light and full of emotion. "You remind me of my brother," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He worked until he couldn't anymore, and I lost him. You look just like him when you sleep." Ethan's chest tightened painfully. He had spent years surrounded by people who saw him as power, money, authority, but in that moment, this quiet woman saw something else. She saw a person. She stood slowly, wiping her eyes, and turned toward the door. That's when Ethan finally spoke. "Clara." Her name came out quietly but firmly. She froze, her whole body stiffening. The lamp flickered in her hand. "Sir." I'm sorry," she stammered, terrified. "I didn't mean to, please, I'll leave right away." Ethan sat up slowly, the blanket falling away. His voice softened. "Why did you say those things?" Her eyes filled with panic. "I shouldn't have, sir. It wasn't my place. I just wanted to thank you." "For what?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then whispered, "For not firing me. My mother is sick. My sister's still in school. If I lost this job, we wouldn't survive." Her words hit him harder than he expected. For years, he had lived in a world where money solved everything. Yet here was someone who had been holding her life together with pure will. "You never told anyone," he said softly. She shook her head. "It's not your problem, sir. I just need to do my work well. That's all I can offer." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, studying the fear, the humility, the quiet dignity in her eyes. Something inside him shifted. "Come here," he said finally. She hesitated, then stepped closer. He looked up at her and said, "You thought I was asleep. But you still showed kindness. Most people only act decent when someone's watching." Her eyes glistened, and she shook her head. "It wasn't kindness, sir. I just didn't want you to catch a cold." For the first time in years, Ethan smiled, a real, human smile, not the rehearsed one he gave at board meetings. He stood and walked toward the window. The rain had stopped, and moonlight poured through the glass. "Clara," he said after a moment, "how long have you been working here?" "A month, sir." "And you do all this alone?" She nodded. "Yes, sir. I'm grateful for it." He turned back toward her. "Starting tomorrow, you won't be a maid anymore." She froze. "Sir? You'll work for me directly. As my assistant. You've earned it." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "But I don't know anything about that kind of work. He smiled faintly. You'll learn. I can teach you. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she covered her mouth, unable to speak. Ethan took the note she had left on his table and opened it. Inside, written in neat handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for giving me a reason to hope again." He read it twice, his heart tightening with something unfamiliar, warmth. When he looked up, Clara was still standing there, trembling between shock and gratitude. "Go rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow's a new beginning for both of us." She nodded, bowing slightly before stepping out into the hallway. As the door closed behind her, Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the note in his hands. For years, his life had been numbers, power, and silence. But tonight, a shy maid's quiet kindness had reminded him that the smallest gestures could change everything. He looked out the window as dawn began to break, a faint smile curving his lips. For the first time in a very long while, he felt alive.